They told her that love would be her safe harbor in a harsh land, but the morning she stepped into her wedding dress, she never imagined it would be stained with dust and blood. In a single heartbeat, the promise of forever shattered into ruin, her dreams buried beneath the echo of gunshots and the screams of betrayal. She stood among smoldering embers and corpses, the scent of gunpowder choking the air as bridesmaids lay broken, and her groom's fate hung in uncertainty. Who did this? Why? And how would she survive the justice she now craves? The pain in her heart isn't just loss. It's a vow that no man will ever take from her the right to seek truth. No outlaw escape her reckoning, and no memory of him vanish without redemption. In this unforgiving frontier, love must battle against vengeance, and survival demands sacrifice. You're about to witness a romance born in dust and blood, tested in gunfire and night, a love story that refuses to die. Stay close, because every whisper, every betrayal, every secret will unravel. And when it does, it will demand everything from them both. Trinity Rose was never meant for life behind wedding veils and white silk. She was born under a desert sun, raised among dust-stained rail towns and the harsh whispers of survival. Her heart held a secret strength, one forged by hardship, tempered by faith, sharpened by loss. On the eve before her wedding in Sundown Ridge, she wore a smile of naive hope, a bride ready to leave her past behind. But in her eyes there was already a shadow, a memory she tried to silence, of a gang called the Hollisters, and a mentor-turned-predator named Crow, whose betrayal burned deeper than any bullet. Garrett McCallister, a lone gunslinger with a past as jagged as the canyons, rode into Sundown Ridge with secrets of his own. Famous in whispers, feared by some, misunderstood by many, he carried the weight of regret and a blade keen for justice. When their paths collided at Trinity's fateful wedding dawn, sparks of anger and longing lit between them. She saw a weary man haunted by guilt. He saw a bride whose dreams had already begun to fracture. Their meeting was unplanned, their bond forged in tragedy. Yet fate would demand they cling to each other. Because in the dust and blood of that morning, their destinies would become forever entangled. The morning sun rose over Sundown Ridge with the kind of golden light that makes promises feel eternal. Dust shimmered like diamonds in the air, drifting down from the cliffs as townsfolk bustled with anticipation. The scent of wild sage mixed with baking bread and gun oil, a reminder that even joy had to share space with danger in this corner of the Wild West. Trinity Rose, radiant in her lace-trimmed wedding dress, stood before a cracked mirror in the back room of the chapel. She had dreamed of this day since she was a girl wandering the plains barefoot. But now, even in her beauty, her reflection trembled. Behind her smile was a whisper of unease, a ghost of something buried, something not yet done with her. Outside, garlands hung between weathered fence posts. Musicians tuned fiddles, and local children practiced tossing rose petals down the aisle. Thomas Langley, her soon-to-be husband, waited with polished boots and a smile too clean for this dusty world. A cattle baron's son with dreams of statehood and civil order, Thomas offered a life Trinity didn't know how to live, but wanted to try. The town of Sundown Ridge had gathered to witness a union that felt like the first step toward peace. But peace is a dangerous illusion in the frontier. And just beyond the town's edge, watching from the Devil's Spine Ridge, rode the storm they never saw coming. Crow Hollister, once outlaw, once mentor, once almost father to Trinity, had returned. He was the one who had taught her how to shoot, how to ride, how to disappear in silence. He'd raised her after her parents vanished in a blaze he may have lit himself. When she left the gang as a teenager, stealing maps and cash, she thought she had escaped. But Crow never let things go unfinished. Today wasn't about vengeance for him. It was about reminder that no one left the Hollisters, that even in silk and lace, Trinity belonged to the shadows. As the bells began to ring, his men rode in like locusts. Gunfire shattered stained glass. Horses screamed. Blood bloomed across white linens. Trinity's first instinct wasn't to run. She ducked, rolled, and reached for the pistol beneath her skirts. A gift from Garrett McCallister once upon a time, though she hadn't seen him in years. Her hand didn't shake. She shot back, dropping one of Crow's men with a bullet to the throat. But it wasn't enough. The chapel turned into a slaughterhouse. Thomas fell, blood pouring from his chest. The preacher tried to shield the children, but fell with a hymn still on his lips. Trinity watched, frozen, as her life burned before it began. The veil tore from her hair. Her boots stepped into blood. She became a widow before she was ever a wife. The next day, Sundown Ridge buried 26 souls. The wedding dress hung over a broken fence post, soaked in blood and dust. Trinity didn't speak. She packed what she needed, a rifle, a map, a flask of rye, and rode north. No one stopped her. They knew vengeance lived in her eyes now. Across the Great Plains, her story began to spread like wildfire. They called her the Widow Gunslinger, a frontier bride turned bounty hunter, a legend in white, her soul scorched with loss. She hunted not just Crow, but her own past, riding through outlaw dens and ghost towns, following whispers like smoke trails. She was no longer trying to be someone's wife. She was trying to become her own name. In a border town called Dustwater Creek, fate stirred again. There, in the back room of a saloon, sat a man with a scar that split his eyebrow and eyes like thunderclouds. Garrett McCallister, former Confederate scout, hired gun, and rumored deserter. He'd known Trinity when her hair was still braided in wildflowers and her heart beat in rhythm with the prairie. He barely recognized her now, but when their eyes met across the saloon, everything stilled. She was fury and fire. He was regret and steel. She ordered whiskey. He matched her sip for sip. When a local gambler tried to touch her arm, Garrett stood. No words, just bullets. The gambler fell, twitching, and the saloon went silent. Trinity didn't flinch. Instead, she looked Garrett dead in the eye and said, "You still owe me a favor." Outside, the desert wind began to howl, carrying with it the scent of dust, blood, and something else. Something like destiny. Dustwater Creek wasn't the kind of place where stories began. It was where they ended. Rusted signs, broken dreams, and whiskey-stained floors gave the town its bitter taste. When Trinity Rose walked into the saloon in boots still wet with blood, every man there felt the air shift. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She carried herself like a myth forged in fire, part widow, part outlaw, part something else entirely. Garrett McCallister sat at the far end of the bar, nursing a bottle of rye, the brim of his hat low over his eyes. He hadn't planned on speaking to anyone that night. But when he saw her, something cracked inside him. Something old and unfinished. He stood, slow as thunder, and walked toward her like a man stepping into a dream he'd buried years ago. Their conversation was spare. Words carried like bullets, each with weight, each with history. Trinity mentioned Crow, and Garrett's jaw tightened. "Still breathing, huh?" She nodded, but not for long. She didn't ask for help. Garrett didn't offer it. Yet something passed between them that needed no language. In her fury, he saw focus. In his silence, she saw sorrow. The saloon faded around them. The pianist stopped playing. Time bowed to two people who should have died long ago, but didn't, and were now wondering why. When a local gambler grabbed Trinity's wrist and called her a mourning doll, Garrett shot him in the thigh without standing. Blood hit the floor. No one said a word. Trinity looked at Garrett and said, "You still owe me a favor." He replied, "I'm listening." They rode out before sunrise, the sky bleeding from purple to gold. The trail north was jagged and cold, lined with bones of cattle and the silence of graves left unmarked. Trinity led without hesitation. Garrett followed, not out of duty, but curiosity. Who had she become? And why did it feel like she was dragging him into something that already had his name on it? That night, under a sky thick with stars, They camped in a gulch near Rattlesnake Hollow. She didn't sleep. He didn't either. They drank bourbon from the same flask and passed a cigar back and forth without touching fingers. "I heard you vanished after the war," she said. "I did," he answered. "And you came back?" "Only halfway." Their silence was louder than most men's shouts. In the firelight, their scars told stories they weren't ready to say aloud. Garrett's hands were calloused from rope and rifle. Trinity's arms bore faint burns from a Hollister hideout fire she barely escaped at 16. They were both wanderers, survivors, not heroes, not saints, just people with too many ghosts and not enough time. When a coyote crept near their camp, Trinity shot it clean between the eyes without flinching. Garrett didn't praise her. She didn't expect it. But later, when she drifted to sleep beside the fire, he stayed awake, watching the dark. Not for her sake, for his. Because losing her now would feel like losing the last part of himself that remembered how to care. Their journey led them to the broken hills near Apache Point, where word had it a man from Crow's old crew was hiding out in a burned barn. The man, Two-Teeth Jim, was half crazy, smelling of sweat and rot. But when Trinity cornered him with her Colt pressed to his neck, he squealed the truth. "Crow's gathering 'em. Devil's Spine. He's got plans." She froze. Garrett noticed the way her hand trembled. "You know that place?" he asked. She nodded once. Too well. Devil's Spine wasn't just a name. It was a scar carved across her memory. It was where Crow taught her how to survive, and how to forget who she was. In her silence, Garrett read everything he needed to know. That night, she sat on a rock overlooking the canyon, boots dangling, wind whipping her hair. Garrett stood beside her, unsure of what to say. Finally, he broke the quiet. "That's where we go next?" She didn't look at him. "That's where I end this." He nodded. "Then that's where I ride with you." She glanced over, her eyes softening for the first time since they reunited. "Why?" He shrugged. "Maybe I owe the world one less bastard." She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Instead, she leaned back, let out a breath, and said, "I never thought I'd ride with anyone again." Garrett looked at the moon, silver and merciless. Neither did I. In the dark silence that followed, something unspoken braided itself between them. Not love, not yet, but the ache of something too stubborn to die. And by morning, when they rode out toward Devil's Spine, the wind had changed. It carried their names ahead of them, like an omen. The ride toward Devil's Spine was a descent into a different world, one where the silence screamed louder than gunfire and the sun peeled skin like regret. For Trinity Rose and Garrett McCallister, every hoofbeat sounded like an echo from the past, a past that wasn't buried deep enough. The land between Dustwater Creek and the Black Ridge was scarred by ancient battles and outlaw trails long abandoned. Bones poked from shallow graves, remnants of rusted rifles jutted from sandstone, and vultures circled like spirits without rest. This was not just a journey to a place, it was a pilgrimage through pain, paved with guilt, sweat, and ghost memories. Trinity rode ahead most of the way, shoulders stiff, fingers wrapped tightly around the reins, her white dress long since traded for a dust-covered duster and leather pants. Garrett followed, scanning every ridge, every shadow, knowing the Hollisters weren't just a memory. They were reborn. They passed through Whispering Rock, a ghost town choked by sagebrush and silence. There, Trinity paused at a well and knelt, not to drink, but to listen. Garrett watched from the saddle, puzzled, until she stood and said, "Crow taught me to track echoes. He said if you want to find a man's soul, listen to what the land won't forget." It was the first time she spoke of Crow directly in days. Garrett dismounted and joined her, brushing his hand along the dried rope of the well. "And what's the land saying now?" She stared down into the darkness. "It's saying he's waiting for me. And he's not alone." The wind howled through the town like a dying prayer, scattering dust and warnings in equal measure. Devil's Spine rose on the third day, dark and jagged like the vertebrae of a giant beast fallen in ancient war. It cut across the landscape like a scar, hiding secrets in its caves and shadows. Trinity stopped her horse at the ridge and dismounted slowly. She walked to a boulder and placed her palm on its sun-warmed surface. Garrett approached, his instincts on edge. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't turn. "This is where he made me forget who I was, where I became his little weapon." Her voice was calm, but her eyes shimmered with fury. Garrett didn't touch her. Instead, he looked up at the black rocks and said, "Then it's where we take it all back." They spent the next 48 hours scouting. By day, they used old deer trails and watched the spine through field glasses. By night, they took turns sleeping and standing guard. On the second night, Garrett took out a sentry silently, his knife cutting breath before sound. Trinity helped him drag the body into a ravine. In the man's saddlebag, they found food, ammo, and a folded piece of parchment. It was a map, fresh, with dates, names, and markings in Crow's angular hand. Trinity's hands trembled as she unfolded it. "These are locations, safe houses, supply caches, contacts." Her eyes froze on one name, Gideon. Garrett saw her go pale. "Your brother?" She nodded. "I thought he was dead. I thought he died in the fire." Garrett placed a hand on hers. "Then we find him. We find him together." That night, Trinity sat by the fire, staring into the flames like they held all the answers she'd buried over the years. Gideon was the only good thing left in that place. He sang hymns when the others screamed, hid food for the kids Crow didn't feed, protected me from the men when Crow got drunk. Her voice cracked but didn't fall. "I left him. I chose freedom over family." Garrett didn't speak. He knew the kind of guilt that carved scars deeper than any blade. He tossed a stick into the fire and said, "You didn't leave him. You survived. There's a difference. And now, you're doing what no one else ever did, coming back." She turned to him then, eyes rimmed with the fire's glow. "Why are you really here, Garrett? Why help me?" He shrugged. "Because somewhere along the line, I forgot who I was too. Maybe if we burn the past down together, I'll remember." For the first time since Dustwater, she smiled. It was small, broken, but real. And in that moment, something shifted. Not love, not yet, but the seed of something more than vengeance, something like redemption. Garrett poured her a shot of whiskey, and they drank in silence, shoulder to shoulder. Not as fugitives or killers, but as two people crawling back from the edge. When she finally leaned her head on his shoulder, the stars above Devil's Spine blinked like they understood. But fate doesn't rest long in the west. High above them, a Hollister scout watched through a scope, finger on the trigger, orders in his head. Tomorrow, the blood would speak louder than any fire. And when Trinity woke the next morning, the first thing she saw was the tracks of a single rider, fresh, circling their camp like a vulture scenting death. The rider's tracks cut deep into the sand, fresh, deliberate, circling wide like a predator toying with its prey. Trinity crouched near them, fingers brushing the impression. "He didn't ride past us by accident," she muttered. "He wanted us to know." Garrett scanned the cliffs with narrowed eyes. "They're calling us out." The morning air was colder than expected, a bite of winter in the wind that spoke of coming violence. They broke camp fast, burying their tracks and moving into the shadows of Devil's Spine. The ridge loomed above like a black crown, and every crow that cawed from the rocks felt like an omen. They didn't speak much that day. They didn't need to. The ghosts of the past were stirring, and the West doesn't forgive easily. They reached a canyon slit known as Widow's Throat by dusk. Narrow, jagged, filled with boulders sharp enough to slice horseshoes. Trinity stopped. Her breath came shallow. This was where they brought the runaways, the ones who tried to leave. Garrett looked at her, not pressing, but listening. "Did you ever see what happened to them?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she pointed to a dark stain on the rock, barely visible but unmistakable once seen. "That's blood. Been there 15 years, never washed away." Garrett dismounted and placed his hand on the cold stone. "Then it's time we make the spine bleed back." Her lips twitched at that, almost a smile, almost a vow. As night fell, they found an abandoned outpost once used by scouts. Inside were old bunk beds, bullet holes in the wall, and a diary half-eaten by rats. Trinity flipped through the fragile pages. It's a ledger, lists of who came, who didn't leave. She found Gideon's name, dated just 2 weeks prior. "He's here," she whispered. "He's alive." Garrett read over her shoulder. "If Crow knows you're looking, he'll use him." Trinity's jaw clenched. "Then we'll take him before he can." They planned through the night, whispering over maps, weapons laid out like relics. 2 riders against a fortress, a bride and a gunslinger. A rustic love story forged in vengeance and wildfire. At dawn, they moved like ghosts. Trinity wore her revolver low and carried a sawed-off beneath her poncho. Garrett had his Winchester and a knife strapped to his thigh. They scaled the southern side of the ridge, using footholds carved during the Outlaw Wars. Below, they spotted sentries, horses, smoke. The Hollisters were rebuilding, and Crow was gathering old devils and new disciples alike. "This isn't just about hiding," Garrett said. "He's planning something." Trinity nodded, her eyes fixed on a tent marked with blood-red paint. "That's his." They watched for hours until they saw him. Crow, older but still lethal, walking like a king among killers. And beside him, bound but alive, was Gideon. Trinity's breath caught. Her fingers dug into the rock. Garrett grabbed her wrist. "Not yet. We go in smart." But Trinity's mind was already spinning with fury, with memory. She remembered Gideon's songs, his laughter in the dark. She remembered how he cried when she left. "He's bait," she said. Garrett looked at her hard. "Then we don't bite. We burn the trap instead." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "If I lose him again, Garrett." He didn't let her finish. Instead, he leaned in and said, "You won't. Not while I'm breathing." In that moment, something between them hardened. More than trust, less than love, but aching to become both. And as the sun dipped below the canyon, painting the sky in blood and fire, the plan began to take shape. But before they could move, a bullet ricocheted off the rock beside Garrett's head. Too close, too precise. A shot fired not to kill, but to send a message. The shot cracked the silence like thunder tearing open a funeral hymn. Garrett dove instinctively, rolling behind a jut of blackstone, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Trinity hit the dirt beside him, revolver already up, her breath steady despite the sudden danger. The bullet hadn't been meant to kill. Not yet. Its message was louder than its echo. "We see you." Around them, the stillness returned, but it was no longer empty. Every shadow whispered betrayal. Every gust of wind smelled of ambush. "That shot wasn't sloppy," Garrett muttered, peering up. "Crow's announcing himself." Trinity nodded grimly. "Then he knows I'm close. And he's not hiding. He's hunting." They pulled back from the ridge, weaving between boulders and dried brush, careful not to silhouette themselves against the sky. Crow had the higher ground, the numbers, the traps. Every step forward now was a dance with death. Trinity led them into a narrow crevice she remembered from her youth, a hollowed-out smuggler's passage where she once hid with Gideon during a raid. Inside, they found old gear, forgotten crates of ammo, and a few rusted rifles. Garrett checked each one, his soldier's eye quick to judge. Trinity sat on an overturned crate, her voice low. "I used to think this cave was cursed, a place you only came to die." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "And now?" She looked up. "Now it feels like where I was reborn." They spent the night planning. the map laid out between them lit by the flicker of a dim lantern. Crow's men outnumbered them 20-1. He had built a network, a rogue militia from the bones of the old Hollister gang, scattered across the desert but pulled back together by promises of chaos and gold. Trinity traced the paths on the map with her finger. If we come through the East Ridge, we'll hit his outpost first. It's a bluff. He expects me there. Garrett pointed to a dry riverbed. Here, I come in from below, take the canyon shadows and move under the watchfires. Trinity looked at him, jaw set. And me? Garrett met her eyes. You light the fire. Get them running. She hated the idea, hated the thought of being bait. He wants me to come in guns blazing, she said. He'll keep Gideon where I can see him. Make it a choice. Garrett didn't flinch. Then we don't give him the chance. She studied him a long moment. And if he kills you first? Garrett leaned closer. Then you burn it all down. It wasn't bravado. It was truth. They slept in shifts, weapons beside them, dreams chased away by ghosts and gunpowder. Before dawn, Trinity pressed her hand to Garrett's chest. You've always been good at dying slow. Try something different this time. Garrett grinned without humor. Only if you promise to come back. At sunrise, the plan set into motion. Trinity rode toward the northern bluff with her rifle slung across her back, dust rising behind her like a warning. She wore a red bandana over her face and a torn Hollister emblem on her saddlebag, just enough to bait the wolves. Garrett moved through the canyon floor, his body low, every footstep calculated, every shadow his ally. Up above, he could already hear shouts, Hollisters calling to each other as Trinity let off her first volley of shots. It wasn't random. She was drawing them out, leading a squad away from camp. A ghost in red, leaving bodies like breadcrumbs. Inside the camp, Garrett moved like a spirit. The chaos worked in his favor. Men yelling, horses spooked, tents catching fire. He slipped past the perimeter and found the shack described in the ledger. Inside, bound to a beam, was Gideon. His face was bruised, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw Garrett. Who the hell are you? Garrett cut the rope fast. The man your sister sent. Gideon stumbled, but stood. She's alive? She's close, raising hell. Garrett handed him a revolver. Can you shoot? Gideon smiled through blood. Only the ones who deserve it. Just as they stepped outside, a familiar voice called across the wind. Crow. The outlaw leader stood on the rise, rifle cradled in his arms, flanked by 5 men. His eyes locked on Garrett, then slid to Gideon. He smirked. I knew she'd come back. She was always the wildest flame. Garrett raised his rifle. This ends now, Crow. But the older man only laughed. Not yet. Not until she watches you die. And then, a shot rang out, not from Crow, but from a different ridge. Garrett ducked, dragging Gideon behind a barrel. Trinity had entered the camp from the south, her presence revealed in a spray of bullets and war cries. The trap had reversed. Smoke filled the air. The fire Garrett started with a well-placed oil lamp spread fast, catching tents and ammo crates. Trinity stormed through the blaze like an avenging spirit, her aim deadly, her path clear. She reached the shack as Garrett covered her flank. Gideon saw her and froze. You came back. Trinity grabbed his shoulder. I never left you, Gid. I just had to learn how to fight before I could find you. He nodded, tears lost in sweat and soot. But behind them, Crow wasn't done. He raised his rifle, aimed, and fired. The shot shattered the air, and everything went white. The bullet struck with the force of a gavel passed down from the hand of God. For a split second, the world stilled. Time froze, and the desert held its breath. Then Garrett fell. The sound of his body hitting the earth was muffled by the rising cacophony of war, screaming horses, shouting men, tents snapping like dying birds in the wind. Trinity dropped to her knees beside him, eyes wide, hands already searching for the wound. Blood poured from his left side, dark and pulsing, Garrett, she breathed, her voice cracking. You stay with me, you hear? I didn't walk back into hell just to watch you bleed out on a prayer. Garrett's breath rattled in his chest. Just a scratch, he coughed, though his shirt was soaked. Trinity tore her scarf from her neck and pressed it against the wound, her hands trembling with urgency. Around them, the Hollister camp burned. Trinity had lit it herself with fire and fury, setting barrels of oil ablaze to cover their infiltration. Now smoke curled into the air like the fingers of the dead, and shadows moved fast through flame. We have to move, Gideon barked, crouching beside her, his eyes darting. There's no cover here. He'll send them after us. Trinity looked up, eyes hard, the blood of the man she couldn't lose staining her skin. He already has, she whispered. She tied Garrett's wound tight and slung his arm over her shoulder. Get up, she commanded. Garrett groaned but obeyed, legs shaking beneath him. Trinity helped him stand, and Gideon cleared the path with gunfire sharp and true. Back through the canyon, Trinity said. We can lose them in the shadows. But as they turned, a shot rang out. Dirt exploded beside them. A rider charged in, rifle aimed, but Trinity drew and fired in one movement, clean, fast, fatal. The rider slumped from the saddle, and the horse fled into the smoke. They moved through chaos. Hollisters swarmed, but the fire confused them, the smoke blinding. Trinity led the way, her path marked by ash and blood, her eyes blazing like a woman possessed. She fired left, ducked right, shouted warnings to Gideon and Garrett as bullets whistled past. Garrett, weakened but not broken, fired in bursts, his aim still deadly when steady. Gideon, young, wild-eyed, reborn, moved like a son of vengeance. They reached the center of camp, where Crow's tent burned like a funeral pyre. He's not here, Garrett muttered. Trinity scanned the ridge. No, he's above us. Watching. He wants to see me lose everything again. They ducked into a collapsed storage barn, breathing hard, bodies pressed to the walls. The heat was unbearable. We don't make it out of here, Garrett panted. Trinity grabbed his collar, her voice a growl. Don't you say that. You don't get to give up. Not after everything. Not after Dustwater. Not after Devil's Spine. He stared at her, eyes soft despite the pain. You gave me a reason to fight again. Trinity leaned in, forehead to his. Then fight. Their lips met, brief but desperate, a kiss carved in fire and sweat. Gideon looked away, reloading. We're not dying in this barn, he said. Let's move. Trinity helped Garrett to his feet again, and they burst from the wreckage, guns blazing. The Hollisters fell back under the force of their escape, disoriented, disbelieving. They weren't facing a wounded man and a broken woman. They were facing something far older, far deeper. Wrath with a cause. Love made weapon. Trinity threw a satchel bomb behind them, and when it exploded, the shockwave knocked out a dozen men and sent burning canvas into the sky. The trio raced through the smoke toward the canyon wall, where a half-buried pass, forgotten by most, waited like salvation. But at the threshold stood Crow. He didn't raise his gun. Not yet. He stood tall, his coat flapping like a banner in the heat, eyes fixed on Trinity. So you came, he said, voice calm. I always knew the desert would bring you back to me. Trinity stepped forward, gun raised. This isn't yours anymore, Crow. Not Gideon. Not me. Not the West. Crow smiled. Everything out here is mine. You only live because I let you. Garrett moved beside her, swaying but defiant. Then let this be the day you stop. Crow's smile faded. His hand twitched toward his holster. You won't make it out alive. Trinity nodded. Then we make sure you don't either. The first shot came from Gideon, fast, loud, a warning. Then Crow drew, and the canyon erupted in gunfire. Trinity dodged left, firing twice. Garrett dropped to one knee, steadying his aim with bloody hands. Crow's second bullet grazed Trinity's arm, but she didn't stop. She moved forward, firing again. And this time, Crow stumbled, but he didn't fall. "You'll have to do better than that," he growled. He raised his weapon just as Garrett fired the final shot. Crow dropped. The silence that followed was deafening. The fire still roared in the camp, but it sounded distant now. Trinity stood over Crow's body, chest heaving. His eyes were open, surprised. "You were always mine," he choked. She knelt beside him. "No, I was always stronger." And then she closed his eyes. Gideon stepped forward, staring at the man who had haunted his every dream. "It's over." Trinity nodded. But then her gaze snapped to Garrett. He was swaying, pale, the blood loss catching up. "No," she whispered, running to him. "Not now. Not after this." She pressed to his wound again. "Stay with me." Garrett smiled weakly. "If I die now, at least I got to kiss you." She laughed, a sound broken and real. "You idiot. You don't get to leave me with one damn kiss." Gideon tore cloth from his coat, helping her bind the wound tighter. "We need to move. Fast." Trinity looked at the path ahead, the hidden canyon trail that led into the open plains. A new beginning. They lifted Garrett together. And as they vanished into the passage, the fire behind them consuming every trace of the past, they didn't look back. They had survived. For now. The trail beyond Devil's Spine was not one of triumph, but of survival. The sky had shifted, darker, heavier, as if the land itself mourned the blood spilled in the fire. Trinity led the way, her shoulders tense beneath a coat still soaked with smoke. Garrett leaned against Gideon, every step a battle, his breaths ragged and shallow. The explosion had covered their escape, but not without cost. Behind them, the camp burned into legend, but in its wake, the Hollisters weren't dead. Not all of them. Some would return, some would rebuild, and Crow, though buried in flame and ruin, had left behind more than a memory. He had left a legacy, one that still pulsed through the veins of the wild frontier. They reached an abandoned cabin 2 miles from the canyon, half buried in snowmelt and bramble. Gideon kicked open the door and cleared the space with silent efficiency. Trinity laid Garrett down on a cot, her hands trembling as she examined the wound again. It was worse than she'd hoped. Deep, jagged, torn by more than just lead. Infection was a real threat. She boiled water over a makeshift fire while Gideon gathered moss and whiskey. "You ever done this?" he asked. Trinity didn't look up. "I've buried men. I've burned men. I've never saved one." Gideon paused. "Then let's do this together." The pain broke Garrett's silence. He arched, teeth gritted as the whiskey touched raw muscle. Trinity worked fast, efficient, her voice low and steady despite the quake in her fingers. "You'll live," she murmured. "You've bled worse." Garrett chuckled through the pain. "You trying to comfort me or insult me?" She met his eyes. "Whichever keeps you breathing." Gideon kept watch at the window, his eyes scanning the hills. "They'll come for us. Maybe not today, maybe not this week. But the Hollisters ain't done." Trinity nodded. "Then we won't rest. We heal and then we end it. Every last root of that tree Crow planted." That night, the 3 of them sat around the hearth, silence heavy like snowfall. Garrett dozed in and out, mumbling dreams laced with names Trinity didn't recognize. Gideon sharpened a blade, its edge reflecting firelight. Trinity stared at her hands. They were no longer hands of a bride. They were weapons, instruments of vengeance. And yet somewhere inside something softer stirred, something she thought long buried in Sundown Ridge beneath rose petals and blood. "You still believe in peace?" she asked quietly. Gideon looked up. "I believe it's a lie, but sometimes lies keep you warm." Trinity considered that. "I want more than warmth. I want something that doesn't vanish at dawn." The next morning brought frost and stillness. Garrett sat up slowly, his breath fogging in the cold air. Trinity brought him water. He drank, then whispered, "You stayed." She didn't answer. He reached for her hand. "I was ready to die back there." "I know. But I didn't want to." "I know that too." He gripped her fingers tighter. "You make me want things I don't have names for." She knelt beside him. "Then let me name them. Let me carry them. With you." Their kiss wasn't urgent this time. It was a promise, soft and slow. Gideon coughed in the corner. "Glad you two figured that out. Now let's talk about killing the rest of those bastards." Trinity smiled, and it didn't feel like ash anymore. "One more war," she said. "Then we build something no one can burn." Garrett nodded. "I like the sound of that." But just as hope settled into the cabin like warmth, a noise shattered it. A knock, not at the door, at the back wall. 3 taps, then silence. Trinity stood, gun drawn. Gideon moved fast, flanking the side. Garrett tried to rise but grimaced in pain. The knock came again, slow, measured, familiar. Trinity's skin went cold. "I know that rhythm," she said. "It's Hollister code." Someone had followed them through hell, and they hadn't come alone. 3 knocks. Silent, heavy, familiar, like a whisper from a grave. Trinity froze where she stood, her revolver drawn but unmoving, the barrel aimed at the shadowed wall where the knock had come. "It's Hollister code," she said again, more to herself than the others. Garrett, wincing with the effort, pulled himself upright on the edge of the cot. "Which one?" She didn't answer right away, because she knew. That rhythm, 3 slow, then silence, belonged to only one man, Caleb Strayhorn, a former Hollister, a ghost with scars carved by loyalty and regret. He'd vanished 5 years ago, thought dead in a mine collapse, but the West had a habit of exhuming its dead when you least wanted them. Gideon moved first, silent as shadow, flanking the back wall with a shotgun in hand. Trinity approached with care, listening again. No more knocks. Just the howl of wind through broken timber. She took a breath, then swung open the hidden panel behind the cabin stove. The passage was tight, old, a smuggler's tunnel half collapsed by time. A figure emerged slowly, hands raised, unarmed. "Easy, girl," he said, voice gravel scratched by whiskey and fire. "I didn't ride this far to catch a bullet from you." Trinity lowered the gun, only slightly. "Caleb." He looked older, more leather than man, but his eyes still carried that half-drunk charm. "Missed me?" Garrett stayed seated, weapon ready. "Talk fast." Caleb raised his hands higher. "I ain't with them. Not anymore. Been tracking them from west of Durango. Heard whispers. New Crow was rebuilding, so I followed the ashes until I found yours." Trinity didn't blink. "You were there?" Caleb nodded. "Saw the fire. Saw you. And I saw who didn't burn." Trinity's stomach turned cold. "Crow's alive?" Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Not well, but breathing, scarred, hiding deep in the widow's range. And he's building again, not just outlaws, mercenaries, runaways, fanatics. He's calling it the new spine." The room went quiet. Garrett spoke low. "We buried him." Caleb shrugged. "You buried something, but that man's more ghost than flesh. You kill his body, he comes back in someone else's skin. He's more than a man now. He's a myth." Trinity's hand curled into a fist. "Then we end the myth." Gideon leaned against the wall. "We're too few. He has numbers, weapons, territory." Caleb grinned. "Then we fight like ghosts. I didn't come to tell you he lived. I came to offer you a map, a weakness." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, laid it on the table. "Supply line. 2 weeks from now, he moves through Snake Hollow, lightly guarded. That's our strike." Trinity studied the map, every line etched with memory. Snake Hollow was where she first shot a man, where she first tasted the guilt that never left. "This is suicide," Garrett muttered. Trinity looked up. "No, This is justice. Caleb added, "It's also bait. Crow thinks you'll come for it. He wants to see you again, Rose." Trinity met his gaze. "Then let's not disappoint him." She stood, rolled the map, and stared at the fire. "We leave at first light. We strike his ghost before it haunts another town." Garrett groaned, standing slowly. "Guess I better learn to ride with one good side." She helped him up. "You've done more with less." But outside, beneath the cold stars, a lone rider sat atop a hill, watching the cabin through a spyglass. He turned, whispered to a crow perched on his saddle, and rode off into the dark. Toward Crow, toward the next war. The ride to Snake Hollow was like chasing a shadow that refused to die. They moved at night, sleeping in burned-out shacks and hunted canyons, their group now 4, Trinity, Garrett, Gideon, and Caleb, each marked by war, by ghosts, by choices too heavy to carry, but impossible to leave behind. The map Caleb brought led them along outlaw veins hidden from lawmen and traders, veins Trinity remembered not from sight, but from scent. Blood, ash, cedar smoke, and memory. The trail twisted through ravines where her childhood screams still echoed. Snake Hollow was more than geography. It was a scar across her soul, and she was about to reopen it. Garrett rode beside her, his wound still fresh, stitched with whiskey and grit. "You ready?" he asked under a crescent moon. Trinity didn't answer. Her jaw was tight, her silence heavier than any bullet. He tried again. "This ends with you facing him, and when it does, I need to know you'll walk away." Trinity looked at him, her eyes like storm glass. "I won't walk away from him. I'll walk through him." Garrett held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "Then I'll be right behind you, even if I fall again." Trinity's fingers brushed his. Just once. Enough to tether her back to something real, something alive, something worth surviving for. They reached Snake Hollow 2 days later. Barren land split by a narrow gorge and flanked by jagged cliffs. The perfect place for an ambush or a trap. And yet it was quiet, too quiet, no guards, no movement. Caleb dismounted, unease in his eyes. This ain't right. Trinity moved forward alone, down the trail, through the rocks where she once trained under Crow's twisted guidance. Each step echoed with memory, his voice praising her, punishing her, shaping her. She reached the center of the hollow, where a single wagon sat, its wheels broken, its horses long gone. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not armed, not masked. Just a man in black, limping, Crow, scarred, gaunt, but alive. Trinity's breath caught. "How?" he smiled. "The fire couldn't kill me. You should have known that. I taught you better." She raised her gun. "I buried you. No, you buried the part of me that loved you." The words struck harder than any shot. "Don't. You were always mine, Trinity. You were made from me, my blood, my teaching, my design. I'm nothing like you," she spat. "Aren't you?" He stepped closer. "You became what I always said you would, a killer, a ghost, a legend. And now, you're here to finish the story." Caleb appeared behind her, gun drawn, but Crow raised a hand. "Don't." Then he looked at Trinity. "You should know. He led me here." Trinity turned, confusion sharpening into horror. Caleb lowered his weapon. "I had no choice. He's got my son. They never burned the other camps. They grew. Crow's not the past. He's the future." Garrett and Gideon emerged, guns raised. "Trin!" Garrett shouted. Crow smiled. "And you brought them all. Perfect." From the cliffs above, men rose like phantoms, dozens, armed, silent, trained, a new spine, sharper, darker. "This isn't a trap," Crow whispered. "It's an inheritance." Trinity's hand trembled. "I'll never follow you." "You don't have to," Crow said, stepping forward. "Just bleed like I did. Then they'll understand." You are the spine now. You are the fire." She raised her gun. He didn't flinch. "If you shoot me, the new blood spills across the West. They'll call you the Mother of Chaos, the Black Bride, the Ghost Queen." Garrett aimed beside her. "Then we'll bury your name with your bones." Crow nodded. "Then do it." But before Trinity could pull the trigger, a blast came from behind her. Caleb, he shot Garrett, and everything shattered. Garrett fell without a word. A single shot, chest high. Blood bloomed across his shirt like a red blossom, hot and fast. Trinity's scream cracked the air, raw, primal, not a sound of fear, but of something ancient breaking. Her gun turned to Caleb instantly. He stepped back, eyes wide, remorse shadowing his face even as the rifle in his hand still smoked. "He said he'd kill my boy," Caleb stammered. "I had no choice." Trinity fired. Once, clean, no hesitation. Caleb dropped, a hole between his eyes, his lips parted in unfinished apology. The silence afterward was louder than gunfire. Around her the cliff came alive, dozens of Crow's soldiers stepping into view, forming a ring of iron and shadow. But none moved, none fired. They were waiting, watching. Crow stepped forward, face unreadable. "You see? You bleed for them. They bleed for you. And in the end, you lose both. That's the cost of love in the West." Trinity dropped beside Garrett, cradling his head, pressing both hands to his chest. His eyes were open, blinking slow. "Still breathing," he murmured. "Hurts like hell." Trinity smiled through tears. "You idiot. You always did have terrible timing." Gideon stepped beside her, rifle up. "We're not dying here." Trinity looked at him, then at the circle tightening. "No," she whispered, then louder, to all of them. "No!" She stood, rising like a storm, Garrett's blood staining her hands, her face lit by the sun cracking through the canyon wall. "You want a leader?" she shouted. "You want a ghost queen? A black bride?" She spread her arms. "Then listen, I am not Crow. I am not his heir. I am the fire he tried to steal. And this ends with me." Crow laughed, slow and quiet. "You think they'll follow you? You think you can tear down what I built?" Trinity raised her gun, eyes locked to his. "No, I think I can bury it." And then she did what no one expected. She dropped her gun, raised her arms. "If one of you thinks he's braver than the rest, come take my life." Silence. Even Crow hesitated. "What are you doing?" he asked. Trinity stepped forward, giving them a choice. She turned slowly, addressing the men. "You followed him because he promised fire. I offer you water. I offer you rest. I offer you peace. Kill me if that's not what you came for." A beat, then another. And then, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Crow screamed, "No! She's weak! She's the past!" He raised his gun, faster than thought. But Trinity wasn't faster. Garrett was. Wounded, near collapse, he still fired one last shot. It struck Crow in the throat. The man staggered, gurgled, dropped to his knees. Trinity walked to him, knelt. "You were wrong," she whispered. "I wasn't made from you. I was forged by surviving you." He tried to speak, but only blood came. Then he fell. It was done. Smoke rose from the canyon. The men dispersed in silence, vanishing like fog. Gideon helped Garrett to his feet, and Trinity stood among the bodies and dust, not victorious, changed. Something had ended here. Something else had begun. The West never forgets. The dust remembers everything: footprints, blood, promises. And when the wind shifts, it carries old names like broken prayers across the plains. But somewhere, out in that sun-scarred corner of the frontier, something changed. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't a warning, it was peace. The fire had ended. Crow's name would pass into legend, yes, but not for glory, for warning. as a whisper of what happens when power feeds on fear and forgets what love looks like. Trinity Rose never returned to Sundown Ridge. There was no church left standing, no wedding dress waiting, no altar of salvation. But she returned to something far greater, something harder. Rebuilding. The pain didn't disappear. It evolved. Every step across dry soil, she planted something unseen, not seeds, but roots. Gideon, now free from the weight of captivity and guilt, helped raise walls. Not to hide behind, but to open toward the horizon. Garrett, carrying a bullet that would forever hum beneath his ribs, stood beside her not as a warrior, but as a man reborn by a woman who refused to let him die unloved. They named it Rose Hollow, a small ranch cradled between dust and sky, where passing strangers were greeted with warm bread, a burning hearth, and the impossible sense that time had softened. Some called Trinity a healer, others a witch. But most came to see for themselves the legend of the black-clad bride who faced down an empire of guns with nothing but a heart that wouldn't break. Garrett never left her side. He had nothing to run from anymore, and neither did she. Together, they weren't weapons. They were shelter. And when the wind moved across the plains, carrying echoes of gunfire and names long gone, Trinity would close her eyes and smile, because in that wind, too, were the promises that had finally been kept. Love, freedom, peace. Those who came after spoke of how a bride, stained in dust and blood, turned her pain into redemption, not just for herself, but for all who dared to love her. Because true love in the Wild West isn't born in flowers, it's forged in fire. And this fire, no one would ever put out. If this story moved something in you, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments. Do you believe in second chances?